The wedding vows sounded like a list of restrictions. 12 months, he said. His voice carried no warmth. No apology. No hesitation. You will not enter my office. You will not question my schedule. You will not embarrass this family with emotional outbursts. In exchange, your father's debt disappears. Every dollar. Every threat. Gone. Serena Vale held the pen above the contract marriage agreement and stared at the line waiting for her signature. Around the table sat men in tailored suits whose eyes said the same thing: she was a transaction. A number on a ledger being balanced. She looked up once. Dante Reyes was already looking away. Not at her. Not at the contract. Not at the weight of what this moment meant for a 28-year-old woman signing her freedom into the hands of the most feared man in the Reyes cartel. He was looking at his watch. Like she was already boring him. Serena pressed the pen to paper, exhaled slowly through her nose and signed. Not because she had no choice. But because she had already made a decision he wouldn't understand yet. She wasn't signing a surrender. She was entering a war he didn't know had already begun. If stories that live in dangerous places pull something out of you, subscribe now. Because this one is only getting started. The Reyes estate was beautiful the way a locked cage is beautiful. High ceilings. Marble floors. Flowers arranged with surgical precision in every corridor. Staff who moved with the practiced silence of people trained never to be noticed. And a husband who walked through all of it without acknowledging any of it, including her. Serena's room was in the east wing. Dante's was on the opposite side of the house entirely. He made that geography very clear on the first night. The staff will show you your space, he said without turning around. Dinner is at 8. Presence is required when guests visit. Otherwise, your time is your own. He disappeared before she could respond. She stood in the middle of the foyer with her 2 suitcases, listening to his footsteps fade completely. Then she looked at the housekeeper, a small, warm-eyed woman named Rosa, who watched everything from the doorway with an expression too layered to read in a single glance. He's always like this? Serena asked. Rosa said nothing. But her eyes said everything. Serena nodded slowly. Message received. She unpacked alone. She arranged her things without rushing. She did not cry. She had given herself exactly 1 hour on the drive here to grieve the life she was leaving behind. 1 hour. She used every minute of it. And when the car pulled through the iron gates of the Reyes compound, she folded that grief carefully, placed it somewhere private inside herself, and closed the door on it. Grief was a luxury this house would use against her. Dinner that first night was a lesson in psychological warfare she hadn't anticipated. The table seated 12. Only 2 chairs were set. Dante sat at the head with a glass of red wine and a folder of documents he read throughout the entire meal. He did not speak. He did not acknowledge her presence. He turned pages the way other men check their phones, automatic. Like breathing. Serena ate slowly. She complimented Rosa quietly on the food. She noticed the small things, the way Dante's jaw tensed when his phone buzzed a specific pattern. The way his left hand always rested near the table's edge, never fully relaxed. The way he drank exactly half his glass of wine and never finished it. She filed every observation away. After dinner, she excused herself politely. He didn't look up. Back in her room, she opened her journal not to record pain, but to record patterns. Because Serena Vale had spent 4 years studying behavioral psychology before her father's catastrophic choices turned her life into collateral damage. And she understood something most women in her position would have missed entirely. Dante Reyes wasn't cold because he was cruel. He was cold because he was controlled. There was a difference. And that difference was everything. She wrote 1 sentence before turning off the light. He is not a wall. He is a door. And somewhere on him is the key. The punishment didn't come with shouting. That was the thing nobody warned her about. By the end of the first week, Serena had mapped the rhythms of the house. She woke early. She explored carefully. She stayed within the spaces she had been assigned. She asked Rosa questions framed as curiosity rather than investigation. On day 6, she made a mistake. Not dramatic. Not dangerous. She walked into the wrong corridor, the one leading toward Dante's private study, and stood there for perhaps 40 seconds before realizing where she was and retreating. She didn't think he noticed. He noticed everything. That evening at dinner, his first words in 6 days were directed at her. "You were near my study this morning." It wasn't a question. Serena set her fork down carefully. "I took a wrong turn. I didn't enter." "I know you didn't enter." His eyes met hers across the long table. Dark. Unreadable. Steady as stone. "But I want to be precise about what wrong turns cost in this house." She held his gaze without flinching. "What do they cost?" He reached across the table, picked up her dessert plate untouched and moved it to the far end without explanation. Then he returned to his documents. That was it. No speech. No raised voice. Just the quiet, deliberate removal of something small. Serena understood immediately. This was his method. Not grand cruelty. Tiny, calculated subtractions. Little architectural removals designed to make a person feel smaller one piece at a time. She sat with her hands folded in her lap. Then she looked at Rosa near the kitchen doorway and smiled genuinely, warmly, as if nothing had happened. "Rosa," she said, "could I get a little more of that saffron rice?" It was extraordinary. Rosa blinked. Then a small, almost invisible smile crossed her face and she disappeared into the kitchen. Dante's page-turning paused for exactly 2 seconds. Then resumed. Serena noticed. Over the next 3 days, the subtractions continued. Her outdoor garden access was quietly reduced to a smaller section. Her morning coffee appeared 15 minutes later without explanation. A vase of white roses she had placed near her room disappeared overnight. She didn't react. Didn't ask. Didn't beg. Instead, she placed a single wildflower she had found near the garden wall in a plain glass of water on the same hallway table the morning after the roses disappeared. It was still there 3 days later. He had not removed it. She walked past it every morning without acknowledging it. But she catalogued it internally, the first thing she had introduced into this house that he had not chosen to eliminate. Small. Unassuming. Persistent. Like her. On the 9th night, she was reading in the main sitting room when she heard him stop in the doorway behind her. She did not turn around. She kept reading. The silence lasted a full minute. Then his footsteps continued down the hall. But he had stopped. He had stood there. He had observed her existing peacefully inside a space designed to feel inhospitable. And he had said nothing. In the language of Dante Reyes, she was beginning to understand, silence was sometimes not dismissal. Sometimes it was the first tremor of something he had no name for yet. Nobody told Serena about Elena Reyes. She found her by accident on a Tuesday morning, a small, elegant woman seated in the private garden with a cup of tea, watching the fountain with eyes that had witnessed more than any person should carry. Dante's eyes. That same unreadable depth. Except Elena's held something Dante's carefully refused to. Grief. Open, unguarded, human grief. Serena hesitated at the garden entrance. "I'm sorry, I didn't realize anyone was here." Elena looked up slowly. Studied her with the unhurried attention of someone who had learned to read people as a survival skill. Then tilted her head slightly toward the empty chair across from her. "Sit." Not a request. Directness was apparently a family inheritance. Serena sat. For the first few minutes neither of them spoke. They watched the fountain together. A bird landed on the stone edge and flew away. "He hasn't told you about me," Elena said. "Not wounded. Just factual." "No," Serena admitted. Elena nodded. "He doesn't tell anyone about me. It's easier for him. I have a condition. My heart is not well. I spend most of my time in this garden or my room." Dante believes if he doesn't discuss it, somehow it becomes less true. Serena absorbed this carefully. "He loves you," she said quietly. Elena smiled the saddest kind of smile, the kind that lives just behind the eyes rather than on the lips. "Yes. In the only language he knows how to love anyone. Through control. Through distance. Through building walls tall enough that he believes loss cannot climb them." She reached across the small table and patted Serena's hand once. "You're not what I expected," she said. "The others, the ones who came before the contract, they were all afraid of him. You are not afraid of him." Serena considered this honestly. "I understand him," she said. "That's different." Elena studied her for a long, quiet moment. Then she laughed. A real one, small and genuine and surprised, as if the sound had been waiting for a reason. "Yes," Elena said. "I think it is." They had tea together without speaking much. But the silence between them was nothing like the silence in the rest of the house. It was comfortable. Human. Two women who had both chosen patience as a survival strategy and quietly recognized that choice in each other. Serena did not tell Dante about the meeting. But 3 days later, when she noticed that Elena's afternoon tray had arrived without the specific biscuits Elena had mentioned enjoying, Serena quietly requested them from Rosa and carried them to the garden herself. Elena received them without surprise, as if she had expected exactly this. What Serena did not see was Dante standing at the second-floor window above the garden. Watching. His hand resting flat against the glass. His face carrying an expression that had no home in his vocabulary, something between recognition and a quiet, private alarm. The look of a man watching something warm appear in a place he had carefully designed to stay cold. He stood there long after Serena left the garden. Long after his phone buzzed 3 unanswered times. Long after he had any rational reason to keep standing there. He stood there until Elena looked up at exactly his window, as if she had always known when he was watching, and gave him the same small, knowing smile she had given Serena. He stepped back from the glass. He did not come to dinner that night. And for the first time since the contract was signed, the empty chair across from his bothered him. The dinner guests arrived on a Friday. 7 men. Each one important enough to require formal table settings, specific wine selections, and, apparently, a wife performing the role of graceful, elegant, uncomplicated decoration. Dante delivered this expectation that afternoon in 4 sentences. Guests tonight. Business associates. You will attend dinner, speak when spoken to, and say nothing of substance about this family. Smile naturally. Don't make it obvious you're performing. He walked away before she could respond. She wore ivory. Simple. Striking. She did her own hair. She arrived at exactly 8 o'clock. Dante looked at her once when she entered. 1 second. No longer. Then he turned to his guests. But one of the men, a sharp-eyed, silver-haired associate named Marcos who wore charm like a business instrument, looked at her considerably longer. Dante, he said smoothly, you didn't mention she was beautiful. The table stilled. Dante's glass paused an inch from his lips. No, he said. I didn't. 3 words. Completely flat. And yet the air in the room shifted in a way Serena filed carefully. Marcos turned his full warmth on her. Questions about her background, her interests, her life before the marriage. The kind of questions Dante had never once asked. She answered graciously, intelligently, with the precise calibration of a woman who understood exactly what kind of room she was in. Halfway through the second course, she said something about infrastructure investment that made two of the men lean forward involuntarily. Not because she was showing off. Because what she said was genuinely insightful, delivered casually, as if intelligent observations were simply the way she breathed. Marcos laughed with genuine appreciation. "Where did you find her?" Dante said nothing. But his eyes moved to Serena's face with a quality she hadn't felt from him before. Not dismissal. Not surveillance. Something closer to recalibration. She did not look back at him. Later, after the guests had gone and the house had quieted, she was removing her earrings in front of her mirror when his voice came from the doorway. "Marcos has already sent a message. He's requesting your presence at a charity function next week. On behalf of his foundation. Specifically you." She met his eyes in the mirror's reflection. "That was fast. I declined on your behalf." She set her earring down slowly. Then she turned around fully. "You declined on my behalf," she repeated. Her voice was measured. No anger. No volume. Just the clean, unmovable weight of a woman drawing a line. "It isn't safe. Dante." She said his name quietly. Like a door closing. "I understand this world carries real dangers and I respect that. But you do not get to make decisions about my presence, my time, or my social choices without asking me. That is not a contract clause. That is a basic human boundary." He looked at her. Something moved behind his eyes. "If you had a genuine concern about Marcos," she continued, still calm, still direct, "you could have told me. I would have listened. Instead you removed my choice without speaking a single word to me." A pause. "I am not one of your guards you can redeploy. I am the woman whose name is on the same contract as yours." The silence that followed was a different kind of silence than any that had passed between them before. It had mass. Weight. The specific pressure of a man accustomed to absolute control encountering something he couldn't simply subtract or rearrange. He said nothing. She turned back to her mirror and reached for her second earring. "If there is a real danger attached to Marcos," she said quietly, to his reflection, "tell me tomorrow. I'll listen properly." He stood in the doorway for 3 full seconds. Then he left. She looked at herself in the glass for a long moment. Her hands were completely steady. She found him at 2 in the morning in the kitchen. Not because she was looking for him. Because she couldn't sleep and she wanted tea, and the kitchen was the only neutral ground in the house at an hour when everything else was dark and still. He was standing at the island with both palms flat against the marble, head bowed, breathing in a pattern too deliberate to be natural. His jacket was gone. His shirt open at the collar. His shoulders carried a tension so extreme they looked like they might simply snap under it. Serena stopped in the kitchen doorway. He didn't hear her. Or if he did, he didn't react. She watched him for a moment, not with satisfaction, not with clinical curiosity, but with the quiet recognition that moved through her chest like thunder heard from very far away. She had seen this before. In her graduate research. In the small windowless room where she had once sat across from a trauma patient who breathed exactly this way when the world inside his head grew too loud to contain. She did not speak. She did not ask if he was okay. She did not move toward him with sympathy that would shatter him. She walked quietly to the stove. Filled the kettle. Turned on the low flame. The mechanical normalcy of the sound seemed to reach him. His breathing slowed fractionally. He looked up. His eyes found her across the kitchen. Something crossed his face so fast she almost missed it, raw, young, briefly and terrifyingly unguarded. The look of a man who had been seen in a moment he believed was private. "What are you doing here?" His voice came out rougher than usual. "Making tea," she said simply. She got 2 cups. She said nothing about his hands still pressed against the marble. Nothing about the controlled breathing, the open collar, the absence of the armor he wore in every other room of this house. She simply prepared the tea with quiet, unhurried movements as if it were noon and the world was ordinary. She set 1 cup on the island in front of him. Then she took her own cup and sat on the small bench near the kitchen window with her back to him, giving him privacy inside a shared space. A long silence. She heard him straighten. Heard the cup being lifted. Outside the window, a single light burned somewhere in the compound grounds. The city spread beyond the walls in glittering indifference. "You didn't ask," he said. "No," she agreed. "Why not?" She looked at the distant light. "Because asking would have made it about my curiosity instead of your dignity." The silence that followed was the longest and the most different of any that had passed between them. Something that had been locked tight inside this house shifted a single, irreversible millimeter toward open. She finished her tea. She rinsed her cup. She said good night without turning around. She was almost at the kitchen door when his voice reached her. "Serena." She stopped. A pause that held the weight of a man reaching for something he had no practice carrying. "Thank you." 2 words. Quiet as a secret. Carrying the full weight of a man who almost never said them. She nodded once without turning. Then she walked back to her room in the dark, sat on the edge of her bed, and pressed her hand flat against her own chest, feeling her heart doing something complicated and dangerous inside her ribs. She had not planned to feel anything for him. That was becoming a serious problem. If this story is doing something to you that you weren't prepared for, subscribe. Because what's coming next will reach places this chapter hasn't touched yet. He came back cold. 3 days after the kitchen. 3 days after thank you and the tea and the silence that had shifted everything by 1 irreversible degree, Dante Reyes woke up and decided, apparently, that all of it had been a strategic error requiring correction. The subtractions returned. Sharper this time. More deliberate. Her access to the main sitting room where she had been reading every evening was quietly reassigned to a new security rotation. Her morning conversations with Rosa grew measurably shorter as Rosa was redirected to other tasks at precisely those hours. The garden remained accessible, but a new guard was positioned there, converting the space from sanctuary to surveillance. Sophisticated punishment. Nothing she could name directly. Nothing she could argue against without sounding paranoid. Just the slow, methodical reconstruction of isolation. She recognized it immediately for what it was. Not cruelty. Fear. He was afraid of the kitchen. Afraid of 2 cups of tea. Afraid of a woman who had witnessed him without his armor and responded with nothing but quiet grace and an empty teacup. Understanding this did not make it painless. She missed the evenings in the sitting room. She missed Rosa's company. She felt the compound becoming smaller again, more pressured, more deliberate in its coldness. For 3 days she absorbed it without reaction. On the 4th day she made a decision. She walked directly to his study. She knocked twice. Clean and unhesitating. "Come in," he said, expecting staff. When he looked up and found her in the doorway, something moved briefly across his face before the stone came back. "You knocked on my study door," he said flatly. "I did," she said. "I want to talk to you." "The contract doesn't include." "I'm not here about the contract." A pause. She stepped inside without permission. She did not sit. She stood in front of his desk and held his gaze with the direct, unafraid eyes that had been quietly destabilizing him since the night of the signing. "I don't know what frightened you in the kitchen," she said, her voice level and clean. "I don't need to know. But I need you to understand something clearly. Whatever happened that night, I am not a weapon. I will not use it against you. I will not trade your vulnerability like currency. Not to the men downstairs. Not to your enemies. Not to anyone. His jaw was stone. I also need you to stop shrinking my world as punishment for witnessing you as a human being. She held perfectly still. You're not protecting yourself. You're punishing me for something that was never an attack. And that is beneath the intelligence I know you have. The silence stretched. Something moved behind his eyes, not anger. Something older and more unsettled than anger. Are you finished? He asked. Yes. She turned to leave. The sitting room, he said behind her. She stopped. It's yours again. Evenings. She did not turn around. But those words moved through her chest with a warmth that had no business being there. Thank you, she said quietly. And then so quietly she could convince herself she imagined it, she heard him exhale. Long, slow. The specific sound of a man releasing something he had been holding at enormous cost. She walked back to her room. That night she opened her journal and wrote. He is learning. He doesn't know it yet. But he is learning. The change was microscopic. If she hadn't been watching the way she had been watching from the very first night, she would have missed it entirely. He began arriving at dinner before her. Not punctually. Early. 2 minutes, sometimes 3. Already seated, wine already poured, already positioned in a way that could only mean one thing: he had been waiting. She did not mention this. He began leaving doors open that he had always kept closed. The hallway near the library. The corridor overlooking the east courtyard. Small openings in the architectural fortress of his daily existence. She moved through them without comment. One afternoon she found a book on the small table beside her evening reading chair, a behavioral psychology text she had mentioned in passing to Rosa 3 weeks earlier. No note. No acknowledgement. Just there, as if it had arrived by coincidence. She held it for a long moment. Then she placed it exactly where he had left it and continued reading her current book. She would get to it eventually. She would let him watch her get to it eventually. And then during the 7th week of the 8th month something happened that neither of them had scheduled. He sat across from her after dinner and did not leave. Not working. No folder. No documents. No performance of productivity to justify his presence. He simply sat in the chair across from hers in the sitting room with a glass of wine and stayed. She did not ask why. She did not fill the space with conversation. She turned a page. After 17 minutes he said, without looking at her. My mother used to grow honeysuckle. Serena looked up slowly. He was looking at the window. His profile carried that careful, controlled expression he wore when something cost him to say. When I was young, he continued, his voice measured and deliberate as if each word required permission. Before everything. The garden was hers. She'd be out there before sunrise. He stopped. Said nothing further. Serena looked at him for a long, quiet moment. My grandmother had honeysuckle too, she said gently. In Georgia. She never spoke much. But she made every person around her feel like the most important thing in her garden. He turned from the window. His eyes found hers. Something passed between them in that exchange that had no clean category. Not romance exactly. Not strategy. Something more dangerous than either two people recognizing a shared grief and being briefly, completely vulnerable inside it without either of them choosing to be. He looked at her for 4 full seconds. Then he stood, straightened his jacket, and left the room. Serena stayed perfectly still. Her book rested open in her lap, the same page as when he had started speaking. She hadn't turned a single page in 17 minutes. Elena collapsed on a Wednesday. Serena heard it from the garden path, a soft, terrible sound, the specific sound of a small person making contact with stone, and she was running before she had consciously decided to move. Elena was on the path. Conscious but disoriented, her hand pressed to her chest, her breathing shallow and wrong. Serena was on her knees beside her immediately. "Stay with me. Look at my face. Good. Keep breathing slow there. I've got you." Her voice was steady. Warm. Precise. She was already checking Elena's pulse with 2 fingers, already calling for Rosa, already cataloging everything she needed. The doctor arrived in under 4 minutes. Serena stayed through the entire examination, holding Elena's hand, keeping her calm, translating medical language into gentle human terms whenever the doctor spoke too clinically, and Elena's eyes showed the specific flicker of fear that medical precision triggers in people already frightened. Dante arrived 12 minutes after the collapse. He came through the garden at a speed Serena had never witnessed from him. And in those first seconds before the stone closed over it again, she saw something on his face she would carry for a very long time. Terror. Pure. Uncontrolled. The kind that cannot be manufactured. The kind that only lives in people who love someone at the absolute center of themselves and spend years pretending otherwise. He went to his mother. Took her hand. His face rebuilt itself into composure in seconds. But his grip on Elena's hand betrayed everything his expression was working to deny. Elena looked up at him and then passed him to Serena. "She stayed with me," Elena said simply. Dante looked across his mother's body at Serena. She was still kneeling on the garden stone. Her dress was dirty from the path. Her hair had come loose from whatever careful arrangement she'd put it in that morning. She looked nothing like the composed, strategically patient woman he had been quietly circling for months. She looked completely, disarmingly real. He held her gaze for a long moment and said nothing. Because for the first time since the contract was signed, for the first time in perhaps years, Dante Reyes had no idea what to say. Later, after Elena was settled and the doctor had gone, Serena found a quiet corridor and sat on the floor against the wall with her eyes closed, coming down from the adrenaline in silence. She heard him before she saw him. He sat down beside her. Not across from her. Not standing above her in the position of authority he occupied everywhere else. Beside her. On the floor. Against the same wall. Neither of them spoke for a long time. "She likes you," he said. "I like her," Serena replied. Silence. "You stayed." His voice was different. The architecture had come down somewhere in the last hour and hadn't been fully rebuilt. "Of course I stayed. You didn't have to." She turned her head to look at him. He was already looking at her. This close, without the table or the armor, she could see the fine lines of exhaustion around his eyes. The accumulated weight of years of controlled damage. "Yes," she said quietly, "I did." She didn't explain further. He was quiet for a long time. Then, very carefully, as if the movement cost him something real, he leaned his head back against the wall and closed his eyes. They sat on the floor of that corridor together for over an hour. And somewhere in that hour, without either of them naming it, the war between them changed shape entirely. 8 months into the contract. 4 months remaining on a document neither of them had mentioned in weeks. The house had changed. Not dramatically. Not in ways that would hold up as evidence. But in the quiet, irreversible ways that happen when 2 people stop performing and simply begin existing near each other. He walked slower past her reading chair in the evenings. Not stopping. Not speaking. But slower, as if the passing itself had become something he wasn't ready to rush. She had started leaving his tea prepared in the kitchen at the hour she knew he came through. No note. No acknowledgement required. He drank it every time. They talked now. Not about the contract or the business or the family's complicated architecture of power. About small things. Books. The city outside the walls. A memory Serena mentioned once about her grandmother's garden honeysuckle and early mornings, and a woman who spoke very little but made every person near her feel entirely seen. He listened to this story with an attention he gave almost nothing else. 3 weeks later he asked her to tell it again, claiming he had been distracted the first time. She told it again. He was not distracted. On a Sunday evening in the 9th month, they were sitting together in the sitting room, her reading, him at the desk near the window with his papers, when he said, without preamble, without transition, still looking at the page in front of him, "I didn't want this marriage." She looked up slowly. "I know," she said. He turned from the window. His face was doing something complicated, the architecture holding but visibly strained, something pressing against it from inside that had been pressing for a very long time. "I didn't want to," he stopped. His jaw worked. He looked at the floor with the specific expression of a man reaching for something true and finding the distance farther than he expected. "I didn't want to need." He stopped again. This time he didn't try to restart. He sat with the unfinished sentence and looked at it. And then, rather than reaching for his phone, rather than standing and walking away, rather than allowing the world to rescue him from his own honesty, he simply looked at her. Fully. Without retreating behind his glass or his documents or the performed control that had kept him safe for years. He looked at her the way a man looks at something he is afraid he is about to lose before he has ever properly held it. Serena did not reach for him. She did not finish the sentence for him. She did not fill the silence with the mercy of easy words. She simply sat with it. With him. With the unbearable visibility of a man fighting himself in real time. The clock on the wall marked a full minute. Then he stood. He straightened his jacket with the precise, practiced movements of a man rebuilding his walls in real time. He walked toward the door. He paused at the threshold without turning back. "I was better before you came," he said quietly. He left. Serena sat very still in the lamplight. She understood what he meant. And she understood with an ache that occupied every part of her chest that it was the truest compliment he knew how to give. He was better before her because before her, his emptiness had never hurt. That night she lay awake with her hand flat against her ribs, feeling her heart doing something she had no name for and no defenses against. She had not planned to love him. She had planned patience. Strategy. Quiet, persistent faith. She had not planned this. The contract expired on a Friday morning. Dante placed the original document on the kitchen table before she came downstairs. Beside it, a pen. She found it there with her morning tea. She stood looking at it for a long time. The paper was worn at the fold lines from being stored. The signatures at the bottom, hers slightly hesitant, his precise as a blade, looked like artifacts from a different century. From two people who had not yet understood what they were walking into when they signed their names next to each other. Rosa appeared in the doorway, took one look at the table, and disappeared again quietly. Serena picked up the pen. She held it. Footsteps behind her. She didn't turn around. "The year is complete," Dante said. His voice was careful. Controlled in the specific way that meant something enormous was being held at great cost. "Yes," she said. "The terms are fulfilled. Your father's debt is cleared. You are a pause. A fracture in the carefully maintained control. Free." She set the pen down. She turned around. He was standing at the edge of the kitchen. Jacket on. Perfectly composed in every visible way except his eyes, which were losing the battle against themselves in real time. The stone and the truth and the terror and the longing all pressing against each other with nowhere left to go. "What if I don't want to leave?" she asked. The silence that followed this question had mass. Had presence. Had the specific weight of something that had been building for 12 months finally filling every corner of the room. "You should want to leave," he said. His voice was rougher now. The composure cracking at its edges. "I made this year difficult. Yes. I was cruel to you. You were afraid," she said. "That's different. Serena. You stood outside my door for 4 minutes, she said quietly. Rosa saw you. You made my tea before you made your own. You asked me to tell you the same story twice and pretended you hadn't heard it. You sat on the floor of a hallway because I was sitting on the floor of a hallway. You told me you were better before I came and meant it as something close to love. His jaw was working. His hands were at his sides, not aggressive, not relaxed. The hands of a man who had no armor left and didn't yet know what to do without it. I don't know how to do this, he said. Not a confession. A warning. An honest, devastating warning from a man who meant every word. I know, she said. She crossed the kitchen. She stopped directly in front of him. Close enough that she had to look up to hold his eyes. But I didn't walk into this house looking for someone who already knows how, she said. I came in with patience. And I am not out of it yet. He looked at her for a long time. Then slowly, as if the movement were something fragile he was afraid of breaking, he raised his hand and touched her face. Just the back of his fingers against her cheek. The most restrained, careful, terrified gesture of tenderness she had ever received from anyone. She leaned into it almost imperceptibly. His exhale was the sound of a year coming undone. He didn't say he loved her. Not yet. That word still lived somewhere too deep inside him to surface in a single morning. Some things require more time than 12 months of war to fully reach the surface. But he picked up the contract. And he tore it in half. Slowly. Deliberately. Looking at her the entire time. The pieces fell to the kitchen floor. Neither of them looked down. The contract marriage that began as a transaction became the one thing neither of them could survive losing. He had entered it as a war. She had entered it as something braver, a quiet, unrelenting act of faith in the possibility that even the most defended human heart holds a door somewhere, if you are patient enough and honest enough and strong enough to find it. She found his. Not with force. Not with tears. Not with strategy or surrender or any of the conventional tools for surviving a man like Dante Reyes. She found it with dignity. With patience. With a willingness to witness his worst moments and meet them with her best self every single time. He spent 12 months turning their marriage into a prison. She spent 12 months turning his silence into a language she could read. And neither of them left that year unchanged. Elena watched them sometimes from the garden. She watched her son learn to sit beside someone without already planning his exit. She watched a woman who had every rational reason to leave choose, every single day, to stay not out of obligation, not out of fear, but out of a conviction that what was beginning to grow inside that cold, beautiful, locked house was worth more than the freedom waiting outside its gates. Some wars don't end with a surrender. Some wars end when both sides finally stop fighting the only thing they ever truly wanted. The thing that terrified them most. The thing that was always the same thing. He turned their contract marriage into a war. She turned it into love. And when the contract was gone and the choice was entirely, completely hers, she chose him. Not the compound. Not the power. Not the safety of the Reyes name. Him. The man at the kitchen island at 2 a.m. The man who couldn't finish his own sentence. The man who stood outside her door for 4 minutes because he couldn't walk away and couldn't walk in. That man. She chose that man. And that quietly, permanently, devastatingly was the only victory that ever mattered in this house. Stories that understand love better than most people do, that's what lives on this channel. If this one reached somewhere inside you that you didn't expect, subscribe. The next story is already waiting. And it will hurt even more beautifully than this one.